Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Moneycontrol Masterclass Ideas for a New India, an offering from India's leading destination for financial news, Moneycontrol, where we discuss topics of high interest and relevance to all our viewers and listeners. The theme this week is War for Talent. Let me bring on board all our speakers. We have a very special panel lined up. Let me quickly introduce them. We have Jagdish Mitra, who is the Chief Strategy Officer, the Head of Growth for Tech Mahindra. Ashwini Asokan, the founder and CEO of startup Math Street Den. We also have Dr. S. Vaidhyasubramaniam, the Vice Chancellor of Sastra University, and Kamal Karanth, who is the co-founder and chief of Xpheno, a specialist staffing firm. Now, COVID-19 has led to an acceleration in digital, and that means more technology jobs, whether it's IT, startups, multinational companies, or even captives of established players. There is a war for talent, a huge spike in salaries. What's causing this? What are the skills in demand? Discuss all this and more. Let me bring on board our panel. Jagdish, let me start with you. Same time last year, the question on top of everybody's minds was, what's going to happen to jobs? People were talking about salary cuts and layoffs. And what a change it has been over the last year. There's been a complete turnaround story. So what's driving this? Give us the IT perspective, and is it here to stay? And is it being driven at the fresher level, at the lateral level?
Well, Chandra, I think, first of all, thanks for the opportunity. And thanks for being in a panel which is such experts from the industry. I think, same time last year, I actually remember this date. I was interestingly mentioning this to a friend of mine that I was just about to take a flight today, which was this date or around this date, to go out to meet some customer workshops. And I was told, as I was going to take a flight in the night, the day morning, I was told that they're going to come and do this virtually as soon as I land in Germany. I said, that would be pretty interesting that I fly from Delhi to Germany to do a virtual workshop. I might as well stay back home and do it. And then sort of things started becoming a little more gray than we thought. And suddenly it hit us. The whole, the lockdown happening, people not being able to work towards it, the business started to take its own time to take a downturn. And we realized that it's not going to be a very healthy situation. But lo and behold, I think one thing stuck. So your answer to your question about what happened, I think what happened is exactly what we dreaded in one way, which is from our health perspective and so forth, which was the pandemic. But what happened to the world of digital is also the pandemic. I mean, you must have seen that famous joke doing the round around WhatsApp saying pandemic or the COVID-19 was the chief digital officer. That's exactly what happened. And that's where digital across broke the boundaries in 3 ways that I have been very constantly talking about: speed, scale, and scope. So everyone that was supposed to do things 3 years later started wanting to do it now. The people that wanted to do things for a small part of the business now started to do it for all, because stuff that we started to see there and the scope of it. For example, typically customer facing process we will do digital, ABC we will do digital. Now the whole supply chain, the whole aspect of business needs to move to digital. So the speed, scale, and scope happened. And as soon as speed, scale, and scope happened, the requirement for talent that is relevant, mind you, talent that is relevant, and I want to emphasize the word relevant, and people who skilled and reskilled themselves and businesses that skilled and reskilled themselves, is where the opportunity suddenly burst. And we suddenly saw from where it was going to be a downturn to what I call is not war for talent, but war for skill.
Okay. Ashwini, give us the startup perspective on this, because various kinds of messages doing the rounds, how, people are commanding salaries that go from 15 lakh per annum to 22 lakh to 40 lakh within a year. Someone's salary has gone from 12 lakh to 36 lakhs, eye-popping. how difficult is it for you to hire in such an environment? Because, as you said in a post earlier today, startup founders spend a lot of the time building teams that will help them eventually scale the business. So what's it looking like? What are other startup founders telling you?
I think, I've noticed a couple of things happening. One, I think, this pre-pandemic and where we are now, if you look at the difference, I think everybody going into lockdown and going into a remote mode, I literally want to start off by saying, I think people coming out of this and coming out of their homes and into work and we're starting to see this happen in pockets or in slow, in small waves, people starting to come out. Especially, I can tell you, it's happening in Chennai, it's happening in Bangalore. We're beginning to see people coming out with very different mental states. There's just a sudden availability of talent in certain areas, and there's a complete glut of talent, and there's people leaving. I'm just beginning to see a lot of movement, right? That's the biggest thing that I'm noticing right now in the market. And I really think that it's a bit of we've had multiple town halls in our company, and we're beginning to realize that people are going through stuff. It was not an easy year for, your 23-year-old, 24-year-old, which is, the average age of, most startups. If you see, that is the average age in most young startups. And you're beginning to see people just sitting up going, what is my life? What's going on? What has happened in the last 1 year? And people just trying to make sense of what has happened. That's one. The second thing is, I think as a market, the startup market is just completely out of control. I mean, you've probably been watching this everywhere, Chandra, right? It's just the money that's suddenly available, the VC money that's currently available to fund startups is, I think it feels like a whole other, era all of a sudden, right? And the start of an era where so much VC money is available. Now, what happens when VC money is available? It kind of becomes a bit of a shortcut to, how quickly can you hire whatever talent is available. And there are a lot of companies out there, in my opinion, that are, spending an insane amount of money to get whatever is possible, right? And it's, parity, what is out there in the market. I think all of that is being disregarded. The downside to this, in my opinion, is that money only lasts for a while. It's not going to be around forever. Businesses do need to become sustainable. So we are going to start seeing some issues there. And then the third piece of the puzzle here, I think, is just a complete lapse in demand and supply. I think the kind of talent, kind of skills being demanded by the new startups versus what's in supply from our education system, I think there is a huge lapse there in terms of, the demand and supply. So these are broad three, I think, patterns that we've noticed on the startup side of things.
Right, you've actually cued me to my next question, because we have the Vice Chancellor of Sastra University for us. And, the common theme that both Jagdish and Ashwini said is, this is not a war for talent, it's a war for skills. And that's where there is a demand supply mismatch. Because Dr. Subramaniam, if you actually look at supply, India has thousands of engineering colleges. There are millions of students who are enrolled here. But people are still struggling to find, relevant tech talent. So are universities not updating their curriculum? This industry, academia collaboration that people keep talking about, is that not happening? Just give us the university perspective here. What's happening?
Yeah, thank you, Chandra, and thanks for the opportunity to be a part of this distinguished panel. Usually it is finally the higher education ecosystem that receives critical feedback of this type. But we should be mindful of the fact that the entire higher education ecosystem is actually sandwiched between a failed schooling system. And I usually say this as, an excessively aspirational industry, and very little time to undo the wrongdoings in the school, and then again prepare the graduates to meet industry expectations, and all this has to happen within a 3 to 4 year time frame. So that is the challenge that confronts all the higher education institutions. And by and large, we should say that this shift from the scope to skill is not because of the pandemic, because we've been facing this even before the pandemic. And thanks to the NASCOM McKinsey report of the early 2000, which anyway I have my my own questionable interpretation of those results, we have always been saying that the employability of engineering graduates has been going down, down, down. But on the other hand, we've seen between 2004 up to 2020, the share of the IT industry in the GDP has kept on increasing. So I have this question always: how is that when the output, engineering education output, is actually shrinking in quality, but the scale at which the IT industry is growing is actually year on year increasing? So that apart, maybe I will revisit that a little later. There is definitely an incremental addition to the quality of graduates that come out of the higher education institutions year on year. But at the same time, there is a plenty of scope to increase the skill set that the graduates possess as they leave the higher education ecosystem. And that requirement is getting defined by the emerging industry landscape, which is contemporaneous. So by the time we prepare these graduates, the contours of the broad industry landscape also keeps changing. And that's the real challenge that education institutions are confronting, because we need two different types of responses. And the war of talent maybe is not much at the massive hiring, the scale at which hiring happens. Maybe a little significant at certain niche skills that are required from graduates. But in my opinion, I think these niche skills are not available in abundance at the graduate level as a fresher. Over a period of time, these skills are developed, and that's where the real war for talent happens. And I'll stop here.
Right. In fact, let me bring on board Kamal, who actually deals with companies. You work with startups, you work with GICs, you work with product companies. So give us a sense of what the demands actually are. What kind of skills are people looking for? Like Dr. Vaidhyasubramaniam said, these are not skills that freshers may have. It is something that you get once you're, 4 or 5 years into the industry, into the segment that you work. So where are you seeing a lot of action as we speak?
In fact, we have to start by asking where the action is not in the sectors that we operate, right? So if you look at the tech hiring landscape and if you divide them into subsectors, the top 5 subsectors in that would be the services, which possibly is the largest segment. Then the product companies, in terms of the value chain, you have GICs, which possibly the second largest. Then comes the product companies. Then you have the startup ecosystem, and you have the consulting companies, the big 4 and 5, 6 kind of companies. So these are 5 broad clusters in which tech talent, gets hired. And if you have to understand where the demand is, it's also important to understand the context of this demand. The context of this demand is coming from the back of a year where close to 2 million IT jobs were up for grabs. But if you look at the first half, which was really skewed because nothing happened, it was a frosty winter. The second half of the period last year that we looked at, as a recruiter, we enjoyed our moments under the sun, and we still are. I have not seen a time like this after 2002 and 2015. 2002 to 2005 was the period post 9/11, when really recruitment activities at its peak. And I think for the first time in many years, our recruiters never went for a Christmas break this time. So that is the context of where we are. And I think if you look at last year, when I talked about 2 million jobs that were there, and when the recovery happened, you have to look at the context of what happened. One, the talent between 2 to 8 years experience range are the ones who are the most mobile and most in demand at this point of time across these 5 spectrums of industries that I talked about within tech. Now, in that, many of them did not get hikes, or if they got, it was a paltry one. And every year, remember, in every alternate year, they moved, and there were no opportunities. And at the same time, if you look at the companies who were hiring, they had put it on hold. They had not given the hikes, and they won contracts. Their bench got utilized. There's hardly any bench left as the year moved to the latter part of it, right? So they also had to deploy talent to their new customers whom they won. And at the same time, you saw the startup ecosystem where continuously the funding was happening, as the numbers are there for you. And they themselves hired 31,000 people last year, the startup ecosystem, of which 80% were tech talent. So, if you look at the segments, these are the segments in which maximum action happened. The services sector, the product sector, where, product sector, I would say typically incremental movement in the second half of the year. The interesting part of GICs is they went on possibly a lull for about 3-4 months. Then the action started, and 20 new GICs came last year. And each GIC on an average, would be about 400 to 600, depending on that. There was a couple of GICs which actually recruited 1,500 people in the same time. So 8,000 new jobs for people who had expertise. They didn't hire freshers. So if you put all these things together as to what happened to services companies, the exhausted bench, what happened to GICs, more GICs came, about 8,000 to 10,000 new jobs got created. Startups got more funding. Clearly, as we sit today, there are about 5,000 open jobs in Bangalore for tech talent and startups. So if you put all these things together, that is what got heated up, and what you're seeing around today is a resultant of that.
Right.
And of course, the skills that you mentioned, clearly the digital skills are in demand today. We still have a bit of a legacy skills going, but about 15% of them, but mostly 85% of the skills in demand are the digital skills.
Right. So 5,000 open jobs for startups in Bangalore itself. For those viewers, watching this, and now that we've had opening remarks from all our speakers, if you have questions, please continue. Please start sending them to our YouTube channel, Twitter, and Facebook. We'll get them answered from our speakers. But Jagdish, coming to you, this burst of hiring that we are seeing from an IT perspective. Again, you said, it's a war for skills, not for talent. But, if you go by the pyramid structure that IT companies have, it's skewed towards freshers. But the hiring that you're seeing now, is this for freshers? Is this for laterals? Do you need people that can be immediately deployed on projects? Because the pace of contracts, that's also gone up in a huge way in the last year. So what patterns are you seeing on the hiring front?
Well, I think, Chandra, we're seeing talent requirement across the board. And I think, there was discussion about NASSCOM report and all that, and we'll come to that. I still feel that there is a lot to be done in the way we train our freshers, and the responsibility lies both in the industry as well as in the academia, because I think the fact that we are growing, in spite of that, shows there is money that we are leaving on the table. And that, according to me, is where the biggest opportunity lies, because if you look at the whole volume of engineering graduates that come out of engineering schools, I think we were on record saying that a very small percentage is readily deployable and used in creating solutions or creating the products that we are talking about. So there's obviously work to be done there. And therefore, if that can be done, even this industry, which is 200 billion today per year, and giving to be 350 for the NASSCOM McKinsey report in 2025, can possibly be a $500 billion industry. So that's the opportunity that we are, I think, leaving on the table if we don't get this right. So to your question of what kind of skills, I think there is primarily a huge amount of demand for digital skills. And what we define by digital skills, especially in tech and I think most of the industry, AI, data science, cybersecurity are the three most hot skills that we are looking for in every program that we are looking at. The senior level skills that we are looking at is a lot aligned with domain and digital transformation. So program management, digital transformation in domain, so industry understanding, because the layers are blurring as we start to look at it. The layers that are blurring is the pyramid itself that you talked about, Chandra, is no longer the pyramid that we are referring to. It's itself coming down, roles getting moved out. People who are doing only project management are now being asked to do both tech and project management together. So it's not that you'll get one guy who will manage the whole resource base and one guy who will manage the capability related to, managing the whole area of the technology part of the project. You get another guy who will do this. There's no such, like you had, the one skill programmer or the multi-skilled programmer or the software engineer, you're also getting multi-skilled managers. So the hiring, at least in the last 12 months odd in the pandemic, just to give you an idea. And this hiring has been across the board, both in terms of freshers coming in, the laterals getting hired, and actually business development folks that we got hired. We hired approximately more than 200 odd business development folks, and all of them, by the way, are also getting compressed, saying we need at least 2 skills in you. You want to be able to talk tech, and you should be able to sell business as well. So in the myth that only the full stack programmer is required to do the software engineering job is changing, because everyone needs to be full stack now.
And before I go to Ashwini, Jagdish, I had a follow-up question. Ashwini spoke about how this never-ending funding tap for startups is fueling some of this euphoria. Whether it will be sustainable or not, we will have to wait and see. If I look at IT companies, TCS recently announced a hike. Accenture has done it. Cognizant has set aside an ESOP pool for that. So do you anticipate a spike in attrition in the coming quarters? Again, will we see salaries go up? And will this happen across levels, at the fresher level and the lateral level?
I think we will see, as demand starts to get squeezed, you will see people putting, attrition definitely going up. And it's been an industry trend for any standard economics. Obviously demand is higher than what supply can meet. So you will see, spikes of this come up in the future. I think every company is trying to figure out different mechanisms to solve the problem. We, for example, have decided that in order to solve the problem, we are going to maybe make sure that we, at the end of the day, are going to treat the gig economy with a gig solution. So we've actually created a gig platform which allows people to come from outside, do that piece of their project, and get out when they're not needed. So it gives them flexibility. It gives us access to talent. And the biggest advantage that pandemic has thrown to us, I'm no longer limited to a tier 1, tier 2 city or a town for getting my talent. My talent can now work from anywhere in the world, more so literally. And that's why I said in the beginning comment, Chandra, that the whole aspect of what we said is a great future of digital and would happen someday. What the COVID-19 and pandemic has done is brought all of those issues now. So what we thought would be this whole global village of where people can work from anywhere, talent can be sourced anywhere, people can work for 2 hours and get this done, is now a reality. A reality right. Because like us, otherwise we'll have a very tough time managing the talent. So, attrition is going to happen, but we all have our strategies in place to hopefully make sure that we are able to respond to it.
Right. We're getting questions from our audience. But before that, Ashwini, again, this is the other aspect. The thing is, you can now hire from anywhere in India because of remote working. In fact, a startup CEO we were speaking to a few weeks ago said that, while talent is the biggest challenge, the upside is the entire India market is now open to you, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari to, wherever there are these skills. So would that be a way of tackling this? And again, the gig platform is also very interesting. Would that be a workaround that, you kind of hire as you have projects and then perhaps they finish that and move on? Your own take on this?
I'm one of those people that believes in the importance of fixing the foundation. While I do think that, access to talent across the country has definitely opened up, right? I think that's a huge point. There's no doubt about it. The question still becomes, what are the kinds of jobs and skills you're expecting people to come in with when they graduate versus the reality on the ground of what you actually see, right? One of the things I wanted to point out here is, in today's day and age, every job is a data job, okay? And this is something that it's absolutely undeniable. Whether it's sales, you now have a role called sales ops. If it's customer success, there's a role called customer success ops. There's delivery ops. There is product ops. And basically what this really means is that every person, regardless of whether they're a product person, an engineer of some kind, a salesperson, it doesn't matter who you are, marketing person, it's extremely important for you to understand everybody has to have data analytics skills, right? Everybody needs to look at their job through the lens of data, which also means by default, everybody needs to understand the business in a larger context using data, right? So this I think is not I really don't know that this is tied so much into where people are. While I do think access to talent has gotten better, I think from a skill set perspective, I don't think systemically we're there yet. And we have programs in-house where right off the bat, you're kind of thrown into the deep end, right? To be able to analyze your work through the lens of data. So that's one point, right? The second point, I think, is one of, when we say engineers or engineering or tech talent, I think immediately you think, most people say, oh, it has to be people that program, right? Or you're coding. There are so many types of engineers, right? There are sales engineers, there's solution engineers, there's front-end engineers, back-end engineers, full-stack engineers, platform engineers, ML engineers, data engineers. Like, I could go on, right? Like, there are so many different types of engineers. And there are product people, product management people, product marketing people, program managers. And the more I think about it, I want to agree with one of the things that Jagdish just mentioned, is that no one is an island anymore, right? When you're expecting to see these people come in through the funnel and they come into your organization, especially as a startup, everybody needs to be wearing multiple hats. There's just no way out of this, right? And by the time you're 2 years old in a company, you're already the senior, right? Like, you're the senior, and then you're looking at 10 new kids who are joining straight out of school, fresh-eyed, and you're, as a 2-year-old, you're the new guy that's basically managing. You're a manager within 2 to 3 years. So the learning curve is incredibly steep, right? And when you're thrown into the deep end, we're an AI startup. When we're looking for resumes, our ratio, it can be anywhere between 500 to 1,000:1. That's how many resumes we go through before we hire, because we're talking about people with Python skill sets, people that have GitHub profiles, people that are, already have a portfolio that they can come in with, right? It doesn't just matter. It doesn't just, matter from an AI perspective, but across the board. And so I think it's really important for us to think about hiring and talent in a very systems approach rather than a one-off approach, because especially in the startup world, I think every single employee is basically building the business, right? Every single employee is building the business.
Right. Jagdish, there are a couple of IT-related questions, so I'm going to bounce those off to you. How to apply for IT data jobs if one is 5 to 6 year experience from another core industry but has the relevant skills? The second one is, I'm a mechanical engineer. Can you elaborate why manufacturing field has not seen growth like IT? What should we do?
Chandra, first of all, let me take the first one. I would love to, if you're in IT, if you're looking for an IT data job and you're from another core industry, if you understand more, so let me talk about what Ashwini kind of spoke about. We do work with Ashwini's company as part of doing some work around the work that they're doing in AI. And the one thing that we all constantly look for, not just we, but our customers look for, is our understanding of the business. So you won't apply AI or data science or cybersecurity in isolation. It's not something that you sort of throw saying that I know blockchain. What people look for is, what does blockchain do in my industry, in my business? If I am a retail business or a healthcare business or a telecom business or a banking business, how do I apply those technologies? So the answer to your first question is, if you understand the industry and you understand how to use the technology to be able to do this, then you have a great opportunity to enter those data jobs, because and there are many such skilling programs, so that you understand how to use data, because there is NASSCOM's Future Skill Program. There are many such programs that everyone runs. My recommendation is that any one of us who has an industry background and understands the business process, you are very, very valuable, because you know how the industry or that business process works. All you need to now plug in is how to leverage one piece of data generated from one part of the business to make meaning in another part. So that, to your answer, is that's how you would bring together another core industry as relevant skills and come to their IT data jobs, because that's what you bring. To your second question of saying I'm a mechanical engineer and why manufacturing field is not seen a growth like in IT, I think manufacturing field is starting to see significant growth. I don't agree with you that it is not seeing as growth as in IT, because the IT-OT collaboration, that is information technology and operational technology, the factory of the future type work that is happening, and wait till 5G comes and hits us. The biggest impact that 5G will come and have is on manufacturing setup, our smart factory setup, our usage of smart digital twins to be able to do stuff. All of this, look at what happened during the pandemic. We had a set of situations where factories were existing, but people couldn't go. Now, take that forward. Hopefully, the pandemic soon or later comes to an end and we are all back to our normal lives. But imagine what it has told us. Your manufacturing setup today can be set up in a remote place where there is raw material available, or it is best for you to do it, but you don't get the people talent as many as possible, but you could use a digital twin to use it. So manufacturing is really poised for the biggest use of digital technology, both in terms of, as I said, IT, OT, and second in terms of 5G.
Right.
And we are using that in our manufacturing clients all the time.
Right. Two more questions. Kamal, this is coming your way. You spoke about 5,000 openings in Bangalore. So someone wants to know, are these jobs available only with people with engineering backgrounds? So if you can help them with, how they can take advantage of these job openings and where to apply.
Unfortunately, yes, these jobs are meant for engineers, and I can't take away the way the industry hires. We know that there is this tiering of institutes to start with. So even startups, as much as we talk about talent comes first, clearly there are mandates about I want premier institutes, I want NITs. So clearly these 30,000 people who pass out from these two cohorts get the first preference in many companies. It's not that they don't recruit from other institutes, but clearly engineering talent and especially premier come first. Then come people who have other streams in engineering. So I think if you carefully look at the cohort of startups, I think all of them have their own websites, and even if you go beyond that, if you have your own network, I think it's easy to reach out to startups for a job because your CV mostly is not lost, unlike when you apply for a large company. So you're likely to sort of reach out to the right person that pretty fast. So my view is you have to look at who are all the startups in Bangalore, and many of these jobs are advertised outside the social media platforms, their own websites. I think the best is to look at the 4 large VC funds and their listed companies where they've invested and look for the jobs there. And pretty much that's the route I would advise you to take if you're looking for a job in the startup.
Right. I'm going to come to Dr. Vaidhyasubramaniam for a question, but before that, Ashwini, I think this, if you can take this, is there a lack of dedicated path in AI skilling programs in India?
Yes, 100%. And I think before we get to AI skilling programs, let me get to basic programming practices, right? One of the things that we've noticed from just the sheer volume of resumes we get for people that want to have careers in AI, right? One of the first things we're noticing is the people that really make it into the funnel for us, into our hiring funnel, are the people that have most of them are self-starters, okay? And leave AI, even from a pure programming perspective, these are guys that have their own GitHub profiles, that have been coding for a while, that have wonderful projects, that are contributing to open source, right? And you can see that the people that are really making it are all self-starters in some way. They're juniors of people who have gone into the startup industry and who have picked up stuff, right? Because at the end of the day, in the startup world, it's all about swimming in the deep end. Right? Like there's nothing, I'm not going to kind of lace it with anything else. Working in a startup is absolutely swimming in the deep end, right? And when you have a lot of people, graduating and coming in, we're noticing that the only people that are making it through are people that have actually put in the time, been a part of AI clubs or programming clubs, and have a portfolio and have taken the time to learn it themselves, because the systems we have in place today, from a all the way from school to them graduating, we're not yet necessarily seeing entire kind of skilling programs that allow them to code at the level at which the industry is, right? That's part one. Part two, if you look at it as an AI problem, right, and not just as a programming problem, then there is a question of, do you know Python? Do you know, have you been working with TensorFlow? Have you been working with PyTorch, right? There's so many questions around, are you just keeping up? And the pace of development of tech and development of AI is just so fast today that if you're actually not picking this up yourself, there is no way, I don't think educational institutions have caught up to the basic programming standards, leave alone AI standards, right? So whether it's industry or it's the educational institutions, I think we need very, very focused systems in place that actually bring people's skills up to the level at which the industry is headed. Because the industry is easily and globally, I would argue, tech is easily 5 to 8 years ahead of where our institutions are in terms of catching up, right? And every 2 years, there's a new program. There's something new. So how do you keep up, right? So the definite lag over there.
Dr. Vaidhyasubramaniam, is that a question that you grapple with every day, how to keep up? Because as Ashwini said, things just keep changing. And you mentioned this yourself. How does one really keep up and actually ease in some of the supply pressure that the industry is talking about here?
Yeah, I fully agree with Ashwini. And this is a problem that is not unique to institutions in India. This is a global problem because the rate at which industry is changing is definitely faster than the rate at which the university ecosystem can adapt and create, if not the same change, but at least to some comparable levels. Now, the challenge is how many of the higher education institutions have the flexibility, the autonomy to engage with such an accelerated rate of change that the industry is experiencing. Now, that's where the real difference is. Globally, around a vast majority of the universities outside India, I'm talking about comparable economies, they have this flexibility because that's the architecture of the university ecosystems there. But if you look at what's happening here, it is only now slowly we are thinking of autonomy, flexibility, and all of that. And despite this little progress that we are seeing, it's still at the transactional level, not at the transformational level. I would easily say that less than 10% of the higher education institutions in India have that flexibility to immediately adjust its curriculum, adjust its pedagogy to meet industry requirements. So that's the challenge. And the challenge is...
But Dr. Subramaniam, would deemed universities in that sense have more flexibility? I mean, why aren't they doing more to update curriculum, bring about changes?
They fall easily within that 10%. We are talking about more than 40,000 colleges in India, and the deemed universities what is like 100 plus. That's all. And other progressive autonomous institutions, the IITs and CFTIs, all of them put together still would be less than 10%. So it is these progressive institutions that have started responding to this type of a changing dynamics in the workplace requirements. And we are creating an ecosystem where there is also mentorship. So within the higher education ecosystem, today universities like us are also taking some leadership position, working closely with our own institutions and trying to also make them, I would say, a sense of kind of a collaborative competition. But on the other hand, what is easily missing is we have been talking a lot about this industry, institute, academia, a lot of conferences, seminars, and all of that is easily happening. But a lot of work needs to be done in that area because it's easily said than done. But what is prominently missing is, I'm not in search of a magic formula, but at least a kind of a systemic solution that has all those ingredients in place that will perfectly have one industry, institution, collaborative pathway. And it is not just one formula. It keeps changing based on industry's requirement. There are different institutions with different expertise, different capacity building mechanism. So the right industry institute collaborative mechanism is missing. And all that is existing today is very polarized because of certain factors which are actually beyond the levels of expertise that exist in institutions. It's either the brand that is pulling, or it is just that one person clearly defines the direction. So it's very polarized but not balanced. So what we need today is a balanced industry institute interaction mechanism that can address the challenges. Point number two is Ashwini mentioned about the skills of AI. And likewise, Jagdish was also talking about the growing skills, especially in cyber, AI, data sciences, and all of that. Today, if you look at the STEM education, I'm not going to call it the engineering education. The STEM education is mindful of the growing requirement of these emerging paradigms that's defining the industry workscape. But huge issue is a faculty crisis on one hand, and on the other hand, the type of students who also join STEM education. Now, this is an issue. Lack of time, I cannot expand this. But these two are exploding issues that need to be handled. And right now,
I'll come back to this.
best instrument to handle that is tellingly visible. We have an online L&D space that has to be harnessed to its fullest potential as we move forward.
Right. Lot of questions coming in from viewers. So Jagdish, I think I'm going to toss this to you. How to grow as a project coordinator in an IT project management job? That's a very specific question. So if you can take that.
Firstly, I think the role of the project coordinator to whoever asked that question is not what one should be. First of all, that, as I said, is getting fused with the technology and the project management, both of them coming together. So I would rather call it as more a program management role. So what one should aspire for is projects ultimately are larger projects, especially in companies like ours, is a composition of multiple smaller projects that come together. So anyone who's able to manage the program, which basically means end to end from a supply chain perspective of the project, like where is what does the business P&L look like, where does the technology team come to, what does the architecture looking like, how does the solution get delivered. To me, that's the whole complete opportunity that lies for people as they move up in the delivery hierarchy or the engineering hierarchy of projects. And that to me is not the coordinator role, but what you should look for is complete program management role. That's a much more fulfilling opportunity and a fulfilling job.
Right. The second one, I see huge potential in cloud security, but I'm from an electronics background. Any suggestions, Jagdish?
Well, I think, I think none of us, frankly, that's the good part of this absolutely level playing field that Ashwini and some of us and others talked about in terms of new technology that we come. I told you that we work with, Ashwini's company, and a lot of the reasons that we go to smaller companies like theirs, which is a Mad Street Den and others, is because they have some amazing skills in those areas. And similarly, but we work with a whole bunch of them. So when you look for moving into cloud security and you ask the question saying, I don't have background in it, don't think anyone has. Anyone, no one comes with a background of security, or no one comes with a background of data science, or no one comes with a background of natural language processing or an NLP or a machine language. The best fact of it is that you can learn it. If you know how to do it, practice it, learn it, be a part of the world is an oyster today. It allows you to practice as many, creates as many projects that you want to do, learn as much. If you have the ability to learn, because today it is cloud security, tomorrow it will be something else, because cloud security will come bundled. You don't even have to ask for it. Every guy in the AWS or Azure or GCP or IBM's hybrid cloud will have it bundled. You don't have to worry about it. Then what? So the question is not whether you are coming prepared for it. The question is, are there capabilities to learn, and do you have the ability to pick up something? And that's why I think you asked a question of someone, Chandra, about is it important to be a graduate engineer? I think that's the big transition India needs to make, unlike the West. We have made it so important for people to be qualified at a certain level to be able to do the job. Look at the West. Most of the big dropouts from high school are better programmers. So why do we need to have certain qualification for people to be able to go there? People can be dropouts, and there are skills available that you can pick up and do the job. And that's
I
where
think
the
that's a huge cultural mindset change. I'm not sure if we are ready for that as yet, because degree is a degree, even if you're in 2021 or 2000 or 2007. But, we might see that changing. We never know. But
And
the next.
I should just jump in here to say
salary.
I should jump in here to say I'm definitely in Jagdish's camp on this. And I just want to jump in to simply say, my daughter, she's 10 years old, and obviously she goes to school, but she spends a large chunk of her time with us, coding and building her own games. Like, this starts at home. You don't need to, to put that filter of an engineering degree or this kind of an education. I
So
think
hopefully we will see that change in the next generation, Ashwini.
I do think, I can look at my daughter. If I, now I ask her, do you want to come and work at Math Street? And she's like, what? No, I mean, I'll be at my own company. Why will I come work at yours? So I think the younger generation definitely doesn't come with the biases that we come with. So I want to give a shout out there to what Jagdish just said, to say, I think they will be thinking very differently about this. Our conversation here would be entirely irrelevant to that generation, I think.
Right. There's another question. How can we go for fintech jobs with a finance background and not much tech experience? Who wants to take that? Kamal, do you want to take it?
Yeah, I can go for that. I think if you're aspiring to be in a fintech industry, and really, I'm sure when you want to join an industry, you also want to grow. There's very little chance of you, getting the meteor jobs if you are not a tech. Let's face it. Yeah, you have sales jobs unless you want to do the sales and operations. So there are many other jobs in a fintech company. But I think building a product is the core of a fintech company. Yes. So if you have a finance background, but not much of a tech experience, that means that you will be mostly in the operational and financial part of the role. So yes, there are jobs there, but the technology guys obviously are getting paid more in today's world because many companies are focusing on sort of building the product, and they're all at different gradations with respect to the maturity in the market. So you have a tech job, you have an ops job, you have a sales job. So there are many other jobs too besides being a techie in a fintech company. So you can still go for it if you're a finance job, definitely. But it's not that because
Right.
you're from finance, you need to be in a fintech company. You can be an edtech company as well.
Right. Kamal, a follow up to you for viewers watching this. If you can tell them, five of the five skills that are most in demand today and five roles that are most in demand today, what would they be? A quick rapid fire for you.
Yeah, I think we have to specifically talk about tech stack, definitely back-end developers, full stack, front-end developers, QA engineers, data engineers, and data science already got mentioned. What we call today is DevOps engineer. These are cloud engineers. In terms of tech stack, they would be in the top today. And the experience range also is between 3 to 6 years is what is in demand, if I have to say that. I don't know what else you wanted me to cover.
The roles that are most in demand. I think that more or less covers it.
That
So are these the roles that are, so which roles are getting the most amount of hikes?
Yeah, so I think in terms of hikes, a bit of a variation, but all these digital skills, full stack engineers, if they're changing jobs today, the startups are offering about 60 to 80%. And here, not even talking about outliers, right? So that is what
60 to 80%.
80%, compared to last year when they had to change a job, they would take a 25 to 35%. So that's the shift that we've seen in the last 3 months. In fact, just day before yesterday, we were interviewing somebody who has 7 offers, and the offer we gave him was the 8th. So, so in his notice period, he had ramped up about 7 offers. So that is the world that we are in right now in terms of skills. So full stack, definitely data engineers, analytics, and what you talked about, 12 lakh guy getting 36 lakhs. This is happening purely also because of the pent up demand, right? So we all are fishing in the same pond. And what are we looking at? We want to buy talent. See, if you look at the context of how the organizations, whether it is a startup, whether it is a GIC or a services, they either build talent, they buy talent, or they borrow talent. What I mean by build is obviously you hire freshers, you train them. Typically, services companies have been successfully pulling somebody in a building role in 3 to 6 months' time. So I think they can invest on the building, and that is relatively safer, and you get a longer tenure from them. The buy I talk about is what most of them are into. Most of the startups are only buy. They're not investing into building. As much as they would be training, I think 90% of them are only buy or even more. So because of which the wage inflation, is sort of become a kind of a competition amongst all of them.
Right. Kamal, tell us about this guy who had 8 offers. I mean, you don't have to tell us his name, but tell me what role this is. What startup is it? Is it a consumer internet startup, SaaS startup? Or what role and how many years of experience? I'm very curious. And, we people in the media feel so left out. Some of us think we should have just done engineering instead of doing journalism.
Chitra, you're good where you are, so don't worry. This gentleman currently is working with a startup. He's got an offer from a product company right now. That is the offer that we have given. He is in the data analytics space. So clearly, somebody who's an engineer and has this is his third job already. So the job that we are giving him is his fourth. He's not joined yet.
In how many years?
This is, like I said, it's about 8 years experience. This is his third job. The job we are offering is fourth. So he's a data analytics engineer who moved into data analytics and sort of learned the tools there. Has great communication skills, problem solving, good projects he has done. So if I have to describe him, that's how he looks like. And when we asked him why would he choose a role that we have offered and what basically said, I'm looking at the role. Obviously, I'll also look at
the salary.
Yeah, obviously the financial compensation is the clearest, denominator. But why would you let go 7? All these 7 are a bunch of services companies, GICs and startups. So now we are hoping that he will join, but we don't know if he joins.
Okay. Ashwini, I think this is right up your alley. Will AI code the program itself in the future? This is a question that we got from a viewer.
I think we all watch a lot of sci-fi, and I think there are lots of many different stories of the future that we have all seen. That I want to say that any description of the future that any of us will give will likely not be very original. So I want to start off there by saying that. But I think the way to think, where that question is really going is, AI and jobs, right? Will AI take away jobs? I guess that's really where that question is headed. And I want to say, no, I definitely don't think so. I think the next decade, the next 2 decades are the decades in which people are going to play an extensive role in helping companies and people, right? I say companies and people because I mean companies that are looking to digitize, right? Every company is a digital company. Every company is a technology company in the next 2 decades, right? I'm very confident that we're not going to be talking, 10 years from now, the idea of a tech company is going to be really absurd. Every company will be a tech company. Every company will be digital, right? So I think everyone's going to have to sit up and ask themselves, what does it mean to equip companies like that to become AI native? And this is something that, at Mastreet, this is our vision, this is our mission, is that we've already seen a mobile native transformation happen. We've already seen a cloud native transformation happen. We believe that the next decade is all about that AI native transformation. Now, what it means to do that AI native transformation, one, it's about helping industries kind of adopt AI to do things very differently than they're doing it today. And I think on the second side of it, it's about skilling employees, right? Employees everywhere in all of these companies, they'll all be using tools which have AI to begin with, right? So it's a question of how work is done. How is work going to be done 10 years from now versus today? And so I think at some level, just like everybody needs to be, a techie, or that term never made any sense to me, but somebody who has to be in tech in some ways, you can't be involved in AI. You just can't not be involved. It doesn't matter what your profession is, you are going to be. So to say that AI is going to take over your jobs, I think is just a classic fear that all of us have. I still think that we are going to be living with AI, and that is the future that we have to come to terms with.
I think this techie is a fever that journalists in Bangalore have. So the easiest way to sell any story is to add techie in the headline. But Dr. Vaidhyasubramaniam, I mean, just look at the generation, the younger generation, right? They are changing like 3, 4 jobs in 5 years, 10 years, going from 12 to 22 to 40. So, I mean, is there like is this the way it's always been, or are the millennial generation more aspirational that, they are not patient to kind of build a career over a period of time? Because if you look at the top brass at, say, TCS, all of them would have been in the organization for an average of 20 years, 25 years. They were like in the organization for a lifetime. So is this again, how do you kind of, what do you tell students, or what do students tell you? Is this again a big shift that we are seeing, that people are not that worried about, switching jobs every 2 years, flipping? The dropout rates also, I think, will be very high with, people getting so many offers.
Yeah, actually, the one of the main reasons, according to me, is the the extent to which recruitment is happening and the number of employees in an organization. And since you mentioned TCS, I mean their headcount is huge. So
Yeah,
today,
it's almost 5 lakh.
yeah. So today's aspirational generation, don't want to get lost in the crowd and look for maybe an opportunity where they are visible. So gone are the days where I am wedded to a brand, a Tata brand or a TVS brand, or a brands of those types. Now, a brand is not that really the top reasons for switchovers. Maybe there are exceptions, but the fact that the potential opportunity that they can become leadership material if they go elsewhere because they are part of a smaller work group will give them more visibility is one of the reasons. Now, at the same time, I just want to stretch Ashwini's comment on AI, and she's very right. And also, Jagdish was also mentioning that Tech Mahindra goes to Matt Street for certain AI solutions because that's niche level work. Now that again strikes a question because see, my PhD was on just understanding management education in India and not all the business schools, the top quality business schools. And I have always used this term called bombas, grossly overpaid MBAs. Now, whenever I ask any business school, whenever I have been asking any business school, what is the purpose of the business school? 99% of the response has been that, oh, we want to create global managers. And then I asked the question myself, if every business school is creating global managers, I understand that the business is getting global. But if every business school wants to create global managers, there are enough national problems, regional problems, zonal problems, and domestic problems. Now, are we having certain managerial skill set to unbundle problems and provide solutions that can address immediate pressing concerns of business? Now, I can just relate it to engineering education. Now, if every STEM education, if everybody starts looking at AI, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, but then assume a hypothetical case where the entire T school output are AI, data science, cyber engineers, right? Will the demand, is there enough demand to absorb all of them? So we have to have a good balance. And that's where Ashwini started off some foundational requirements. So engineering is about creating some foundational skill set, which I think still has got a huge demand. And emerging tech,
You can always upskill.
it's not scaled up at the recruitment level. It's not scaled up. It's still very marginal, but looking to be promising, but still a long way to go. But the signal is very clear that institutions that can catch this and kind of create a graduate output that can hang on to this world of opportunities, those are the ones who are differentiators. But not all can be differentiators. There still will be a vast majority of these schools who need to cater to certain job skills that are pretty fundamental, foundational, and not as emerging, as contemporaneous as we think it is today. So that scalability still has to happen. And once that scalability happens, if this 10% moves to 20%, I would say 20% of the higher education ecosystem is ready to adapt to this scalable emerging technologies, then we think we have done a good job in preparing graduates for that.
Right. I know it's 7, but we're still getting some questions. So just give me 5-10 more minutes to kind of answer all of them. Jagdish, if you can take this. There's a comment coming in. I think investing in available talent is better than spending billions on hiring new talents. What do the panelists think? Maybe Jagdish and Ashwini, both of you can give me your quick thoughts on this.
Absolutely. There cannot be a second guess on this, because if you don't take care of your in-house talent and create a program to be able to get them ready for the future, and by the way, it's a two-way street, gone are the days where you can push people into a class and say you're going to be measured if you don't attend a class and so on and so forth. Those days are gone. You've got to be able to paint a picture and make all the resources available to that talent to be able to think, because it's in our best interest, because A, culturally the person understands your organization, B, most of the times they understand the client and the customer better for us, and C, it's A, commercially much more viable. When you're getting new talent, you're always going to pay the kind of money that our colleagues on the panel were talking about, so it makes complete sense for us. But to be able to make sure that this works appropriately, we, as I said, have set up a team which is a platform called BGig within TechM, which allows people to be able to even do one project and come and participate in another project if they're in the company or if they're outside the company using the platform. This helps us create a talent pool across the company, and primarily giving our guys a chance, saying that it makes sense for you guys to reskill. It makes sense for the business to reskill the people, because it's completely makes commercial sense. And that's absolutely the reason that one should be spending more and more time on building skills within existing talent than trying to always get outside talent. Outside talent is good because it brings in fresh thinking, but nothing to beat the ability to invest and build your own homegrown talent.
Right. Ashwini, there's another one coming your way. Can the panelists also please talk about the gender difference for IT jobs? If you can take a stab at this, is there a difference, or is it a level playing field? If you can help us decode this question.
I've spent the longest time doing that, Chandra. I don't think I have anything left to say on this topic. But I will kind of also add to the last question that was discussed, right? And I'll blend this into that, because actually one of my answers to the last question also came down to gender. But one, I want to start off with culture. Okay, I think at the end of the day, attrition, salary, whether people are feeling comfortable enough to stay with you or go elsewhere, everything is a function of the culture of your company, right? And I think that, especially with startups, there's been a lot of discussion around what constitutes culture. Why do people stay? Why is attrition so high? And I think, maybe it's the Chennai field here, maybe it's the air in Chennai, but attrition rates are ridiculously low here. Not for the lack of opportunities or for the lack of people moving to other cities, right? For neither of those things. But I do think that it's important for us to put culture right at the center of the conversation when we are talking about attrition or helping people stay versus leave, right? That's one. Two, I wanted to talk about equity really briefly. I do think that with startups, one of the most important things is equity. When you get to own a piece of a company, I think you end up building a very loyal foundation and base of people that stay with you for a long time to come, right? Because these people are building your business with you. And I think increasingly with things like stock buyback and all of those things that you're seeing announced in the market, I do think that the equity piece plays a big role in this.
ESOPs will help.
Exactly, that's one. And then coming to, gender, my opinion is that one of the simplest ways that we can overcome this talent crunch and supply demand crunch is to simply get women to simply remove the bias in tech against women. And I think especially in the space of startups, I can tell you this is pretty incredible and incredibly high as well. You don't see 50% of the startup workforce filled with women. And I think one of the simplest ways to solve this problem is just by taking bias off the picture, right? We have programs that allow women who've had children, who've gone, through long maternity leaves, come back to work after 8-9 years. And, we have an example of someone who's getting ready to become the director of engineering in our company after coming back after an 8-10 year break. So I think there is an entire segment of talent in the industry that is completely being ignored right now. And we need to fix that.
Right. More and more questions coming hard and fast. Kamal, if you can take a stab at this, what is the future of UI, cloud, and DevOps? Are you seeing a lot of demand for these skills when you talk to companies?
Definitely in the near term, when I say near term, I'm talking about the next 3 quarters, we see that these skills definitely are in demand and very high. And in terms of the companies, whether it is services companies, whether it is consulting companies, product companies, startups, and GICs, across the spectrum, these roles are in demand today. And especially, in the range of 2 to 8 years. So I think based on the job requirements that is in front of us and what we see as panning out for this year, clearly we see that at least for this year, we can't, what new technologies will come, where they will take us, I can't talk about that. I'm not, possibly qualified to say that above my pay grade, but I can only talk in terms of the landscape of the jobs available with our customers and these sectors. Clearly, I think next 3 to 4 quarters, there's enough there. And I'm sure with they being an important element of the life cycle of technology development, it looks like, we are talking about a long-term horizon of scope for these roles.
Right. I think our panelists have a hard stop in the next 5-10 minutes. I'm just going to take one more question. Dr. Subramaniam, what does a job landscape look like for mechanical design engineers?
Okay. Let me confess that I'm not a mechanical engineer, but the jobs landscape for mechanical design engineers, the little interaction that I have with my mechanical people, of course, the job profile itself is changing. So it's no longer that mechanical engineers have to be in the manufacturing space or the industrial space. The domain knowledge that they have today is actually transcending borders. So they have very good opportunities in other design skill requirements, not necessarily in the mechanical space. So definitely the design expertise, the domain expertise in mechanical engineering works together is a very good combination for looking at job prospects. But again, the focus, the, the profiling of a graduate, I think that is by and large getting diffused. An engineer today, as somebody said, is becoming more generic skills because of different requirements. It's no longer getting grounded as a specialist but being graduate together. So the need for a kind of an omnibus skill requirement from engineering graduates is more pronounced today. So we need wholesome engineers, not specialist engineers and graduates.
Right. Right. Just, closing comments from Jagdish and Ashwini. The hiring spree that we are seeing today, is it here to stay, or in a post-vaccine world when, things become a little more normal, we are going to kind of have a rude reality check? Maybe Jagdish can go first and I'll leave Ashwini to have the last word.
Chandra, I think the hiring spree that we are seeing, my view is in the near term will continue. And it's got nothing to do with vaccines. I think it's
Near
got to do.
term would be 1 to 2 years or
Yeah, I
4 to
think it
5
will be
years?
probably at least 1 to 2 years. Is definitely going to continue. And my view is that it's probably going to continue longer. Only reason being the same discussion that we had saying, which we started, that the whole what the pandemic did to us is to realize that you almost have to convert every business to be digital and every part of the business to be digital. So anything new that will come across will also, whether it's, we talked about fintech. Everything will have a tech associated with it. It's not,
Right.
and there's not two
Every
different.
company will be a tech company.
Yeah, there's not going to be two different worlds that will exist, because you can't do without the humongous amount of data that you generate, the humongous amount of the issues that you'll have with the data being cybersecurity. There's that what's coming together. So the need for techies, sorry, I'm using that word again, the need for technologists to come together and solve the problem, the need for blending people who understand industry and technology is there, I think, for the future. For not just
Right.
1 to 2 years, but even beyond. Yes, it will probably go through a phase where something economically will probably go through a crisis and it will come down. But overall, I don't think this is going to go down in the near future.
Right.
I
Ashwini, last question to you, Ashwini. Many people are drawing parallels between the startup hiring frenzy that we are seeing today with, 2014, 2015, where again, startups were flush with funds and they went out and made these aggressive hiring moves. What do you think? Is it different this time, or is there a lot of insanity? When is a reality check going to come in?
This is a 7-year cycle. They always talk about it as a 7-year cycle in the VC industry because of how the size of the funds, the age of the funds, and that whole cycle. And I think 2014-15, we're talking about 2021-22. So every 7 to 8 years, I think this cycle is going to be kind of a little crazy. But I also want to point out that there is a significant change in the definition of talent and then in the nature of businesses that are getting formed in the startup community, right? You're seeing so many new startups in India, so many, just a record number of startups in India, right? So there's also a systemic kind of shift, in my opinion, that's happening with the kind of companies and businesses that are coming to be basically born in the country, which means that I think this supply problem, demand problem is not going to sort itself out anytime soon, right? While we might be at the high peak of it right now for another 1-2 years, I think it's a decade problem, right? We're going to watch this kind of unfold over the entire decade as new companies that are forming, which are data first, tech first, right? Sit up and go, what does it mean for me to now live in this world when one set of companies have raised an insane amount of cash to throw at the problem, and another set of companies are thinking of maybe much more conservative ways. They don't have big pockets, and they've got to figure out how to kind of survive in that landscape.
Right. On that note, completely out of time on this episode of Moneycontrol Masterclass. We had a very interactive session, lots of questions coming in from the audience. I want to thank all our panelists again for giving us time this Friday evening, Jagdish, Ashwini, Dr. Subramaniam, and Kamal, for really putting this war for skills in perspective, the kind of skills in demand, what people can do better to really match up to what companies want. On that note, thank you all very much for joining us on this episode of Moneycontrol Masterclass.
Thank you, Chandra. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.